If I ever were to lose you, I'd surely lose myself. Everything I have found here, I'm not found by myself. Try and sometimes you'll succeed to make this man of me. All my stolen missing parts, I've no need for any more. 'Cause I believe, and I believe 'cause I can see our future days, days of you and me.
Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Leanna. Today I am finally getting around to talking about The Last of Us Part 2, which is probably the most controversial game of possibly the new decade so far, because 2020 starts a new decade. And there's a few reasons behind this. This is going to be a full spoiler video, so you've been warned. I have said it up front. You've been warned. I'm going into this assuming that people who are watching this video are familiar with the first game. So I'm not going to be talking a whole lot about the first game. I do have a whole video on part 1, which I'll link down below. I don't even remember how I really tackled the discussion for part 1. So hopefully it's a halfway decent video, and I'll link that. So part 1 came out in 2013. It was about Joel and Ellie. Ellie being immune, trying to get her to a group called the Fireflies. And turns out, of course, that because the cordyceps virus grows on the brain, that the operation would kill her. And Joel doesn't really give her the option of choosing this for herself. He pulls her out of the operating room before anything can happen. And the ending, Ellie doesn't really know this. She doesn't know why Joel took her out of there. Just because Joel has basically lied to her and says she's not the only immune person in the world. There's dozens more like her, and they've failed to procure a vaccine before. So we kind of understand why Joel did this, but this presented Naughty Dog's assessment of morality being neither black or white. It's more in shades of gray, because while we can definitely empathize with the reasoning for Joel wanting to save Ellie, it was not a selfless decision. It was more of a selfish decision to save one and sacrifice potentially many. So we understand, but was it the right thing to do? It's unclear, and so a lot of people have been discussing that ending to this day. And additionally, because Ellie thought that her purpose in life was to create a cure, she's now saddled with trying to give her life meaning. And at age 14, that's kind of a heavy thing. And so part 2 kind of opens up right after that, with Joel talking to his younger brother, Tommy, and telling him how he basically obliterated the Fireflies just to save Ellie. And Ellie doesn't know this, and Tommy will take that secret with him to the grave if need be. And we flash forward 5 years in time to when Ellie is 19, and she and Joel have been living in Jackson, Wyoming with Tommy and their community in relative safety. So everyone goes out on regular patrols to clear out the infected. They also bring newcomers into the community, people seeking refuge. And things are going pretty well, you know? They're living a pretty regular life. Ellie has friends, and she even has a prospective girlfriend. But we can kind of tell that something's a little bit off. We can tell that her relationship with Joel has become a little bit strained, and this is just kind of told to us through inferred dialogue with others. And we kind of find out through flashbacks throughout the game how that came to be. During the quite sizable prologue of the game, we kind of switch back and forth between Ellie and a new character named Abby. So while Ellie and her prospective girlfriend Dina go out on their patrols, Abby is also tailing Joel and Tommy. And we go back and forth between the two as it becomes clear that Abby has been searching for someone in Jackson, and that person is Joel. And how long she's been searching for him seems like quite a long time, and that she's become a little bit obsessed with him. And eventually Abby, Joel, and Tommy all get caught up together, escaping a giant horde of infected. There's a couple of hordes in this game. They're pretty cool. And they all go back with Abby's group. And so when Ellie finds out that Joel never made it back from patrol, she finds him there in this little mountain resort, and she has to watch as Joel is brutally beaten with a golf club right in front of her. It's a truly awful scene. The first time I watched it, I've played this game twice now, I literally had my hands like this. I was sobbing through my hands, and I know a lot of people found this scene incredibly hard to watch. And it was one of many leaked scenes that made its way online, which prompted a whole bunch of intense hatred and vitriol towards the creators, especially as without context, we found out that we would then be playing as Joel's killers. But I always like to present to you the information in context, because when you're not actually playing the game, yes, I can understand why people might have been really upset. And even when you're playing the game, and it's quite upsetting. But there is a reason why this happened. And there's a reason why we play as Abby. So this is why I'm here to talk about the rest of the game. I'd like to hit on several different story beats and also different thematic material throughout. After Joel is killed, we play half of the game as Ellie. The key players you need to know here are, of course, Ellie herself, Dina, whom Ellie has just recently shared a kiss with, and she's kind of in a burgeoning relationship with her, Jesse, who's Dina's ex-boyfriend and Ellie's friend, and Tommy, of course, Joel's younger brother, and he's gone off to Seattle in pursuit of Joel's killers, the Washington Liberation Front. And so Ellie and Dina team up to go after Tommy, and we will play through Seattle Days 1, Seattle Day 2, Seattle Day 3. Ellie plays quite a bit differently from Joel in the first game, and from herself in the first game too. She's able to go prone and crawl underneath various objects, and she's able to crawl through grass, making it harder for her to be seen. She's able to kind of turn herself sideways and squeeze through tighter objects. She's able to use her knife, of course, which was prominent in the first game, but it's used even better here. As far as weapons and crafting goes, Ellie is able to use some of the same items as the first game. She's able to use Molotovs. She's able to use medkits. Trap mines are a little bit different than the nail bombs in the first game. Nail bombs you could throw or place. Here you can only place them strategically and then walk away. So you have to plan those a little bit differently, because if you can't throw them, then you have to make really sure that you're placing them in the right spot. And also make sure that you're not too close to them when they detonate, because you could definitely blow yourself up. I've done that a time or two. Her weapons, she has a shotgun, she has a rifle, she has her bow and arrow, which now comes with craftable arrows, which is really, really handy, including explosive arrows, which are just a lot of fun. And she has a silenced submachine gun, and she has her pistol, which comes with a craftable silencer now, and that's also very handy. So having Dina as your companion means that she'll also be helping you out as you traverse the environment for the first part of the open world environment in Seattle. The open world environments here are very similar to the last two Uncharted games, where they had Madagascar and explorable through vehicle traversal. Here you're on horseback with Dina, and the environments are huge. You have some optional areas, but you will get funneled through the story as well. And the enemy AI is a lot better, as well as your companion AI. As I said, Dina will help you. Jesse will also help you at times. And your companion AI hits just as hard as you do. So if they fire off a bunch of bullets, they will actually kill the enemy. And in part one, that didn't happen. They could be firing off rounds of shotgun bullets and not actually kill anything. So if you're in a bind, your companions will help you here. As for enemies that you encounter, of course, there are the infected, which in my opinion are a lot scarier than in part one. They actually redid the audio for all of them, and you can tell when I was encountering the enemies for the first time, I'm just like, wow. The audio just sounds a lot deeper. It sounds a lot scarier. The runners are a lot more forceful than they were in part one. The clickers, their echolocation is stronger. So even if you're staying still, if you're too close to them, they will spot you, which means that you have to be really careful. There's a new enemy type called the Shamblers, which is in between a clicker and a bloater, and they are covered in these really gross pustules that spew acid at you. And even though you're immune, of course, acid can still hurt you, so you have to be careful not to get too close to them. And the bloaters return here as well. The bloaters are giant armored enemy types that throw acid at you as a projectile. And those ones are definitely still the hardest to take down. You also have a few different human enemy types. The Washington Liberation Front, which is a militant enemy group, and they use dogs to their advantage to help sniff you out. So one of the things that they really tried to promote when they were talking about this game is that the dogs have a scent trail that can, if you're using listen mode, you can see the scent trail and see how the dogs are going to follow up on you. And the enemy types also converse with each other by name and will strategize around you, which I thought was really interesting when I was playing this game. So they'll call each other out by name. If one of them dies, they'll be like, oh no, Barb's dead. So it really humanizes the enemies. It makes you feel a little bit bad when you've killed one of them. Especially if one of the dogs die, then the human is really sad. If the human dies, the dog is really sad. And really kind of hammers home the realism in this game. There's also a second faction called the Seraphites, which is nicknamed the Scars, so called because they have scars on their face here. And a lot of people were angry because out of context they thought that these were Christians. They're not Christians, they are just religious zealots. And they're different from the WLF in terms of how they fight because they don't use dogs, they use their environment to their advantage. So they blend in with the environment, they've kind of camouflaged themselves, and they whistle to each other. They don't often verbalize, they whistle, which can be very effective and quite creepy when you're trying to sneak around and you all of a sudden hear these whistling sounds. They also tend to use melee weapons and bows and arrows rather than guns because they find that these are New World weapons as opposed to Old World weapons, i.e. pre-infection weapons. They're a bit of a kooky cult. Now getting back to the story. Because Ellie had always planned on chasing down Abby and the WLF, I kind of saw her as wanting to chase down Tommy as being secondary, wanting to bring him home as being secondary to her trying to gain vengeance. And the reason I say that Tommy is not her main goal is because it becomes very clear throughout the 3 days we play as Ellie that there is a very severe psychological deterioration happening. And this is really the point of playing through the first 3 days as Ellie. Not unlike the song lyrics that we hear reverberated throughout the game. She lost Joel, and now she's losing herself. This is shown in how she continues to alienate her loved ones. She's brought Dina with her to Seattle and then finds out that Dina is pregnant and is therefore becoming quite sick because this journey has been really, really hard on her. The encounters with enemies are very hard on her body, yet she refuses to return to Jackson, and she'll go so far as to leave Dina alone in an abandoned theater where she could become very easy prey, just to continue on and find Abby and seek her vengeance. Even when Jesse shows up after trailing them all the way from Jackson, Jesse repeatedly tells her this is too dangerous and we need to get Dina home. And Ellie's basically like, no, I'm going to find Abby. You can do whatever you want, but I'm going. We see Ellie losing herself more and more through the 3 different flashbacks that we get in the game, which kind of start from Ellie age 15 and carry on through Ellie age 17. We see her as this sweet, kind of innocent, silly kid that we remember from the first game, and she's slowly not that anymore. Her relationship with Joel is deteriorating because there's this huge lie hanging in the air between them that she can't accept anymore. It grows bigger and bigger, and their relationship grows weaker and weaker until she basically says to Joel, I can't forgive you for this, and refuses to speak to him for presumably the last 2 years. But perhaps Ellie's biggest loss of self shows up in the ways that she's willing to hurt others in ways that she has never done before. There is so much rage inside of Ellie that we've never seen from her. The way that she kills everyone in her way, including people that really she didn't have to hurt, she didn't have to kill, but she did anyway. The ways that she tortured people, even though she's never tortured people before, she tortures them in this game. And she's had no example for how to do this, except for one. So she follows his example the entire way through, and of course, that's Joel. But Ellie is not Joel. Ellie is Ellie, and so this has massive repercussions on the people she encounters as well as Ellie herself as she tries to live up to him. Each day, Ellie's hands shake just a little bit more, her eyes become just a little bit more distant. Her rage and her thirst for vengeance have become so all-consuming that even if it kills every human part of her, Ellie will do it. Ellie will not find peace until Abby is dead. At least that's what Ellie believes she has to do. At the end of Seattle Day 3, Ellie finds her way to Abby's last known location, only she doesn't find Abby there. Instead, she finds a dog who attacks her, so Ellie kills the dog. She finds 2 WLF, a man and a woman, who should be recognizable if you remember the start of the game. And trying to emulate Joel once more, her tactics fail, and she kills both of them. And on the man's dying breath, he tells Ellie the woman is pregnant. So consumed with grief, Ellie collapses, and that's when Tommy finally finds her and brings her back to Dina and Jesse. But that's when Abby finally walks in and all hell breaks loose. She shoots Jesse. She points her weapons at Tommy and Ellie. But things don't come to an end here. That's when the narrative flips. And this is where things, once again, became a little rage-inducing for people. Because a lot of people expected that this is where the end of the game was. We're finally going to get some closure. But instead, it didn't happen. And I understand this part can be a little bit jarring. It was for me as well. Suddenly waking up as Abby after 15 hours instead of coming to the game's conclusion can be a little bit like, huh. And I was kind of like, oh, well, I'm not going to be playing as Abby for that long. It's probably just going to be like, I don't know, an hour or two. Then I realized, oh, okay, I'm collecting parts for my weapons. Oh, okay, I'm collecting character upgrades. And I realized I'm going to be playing as Abby for a long time. And I was okay with that. Ever since she killed Joel, I had been asking myself, why did Abby do that? Why did she spare Tommy and Ellie? So I knew I was finally going to get an answer for that, and that's what I wanted. In Abby's first flashback, we see the reason why. She is the daughter of the surgeon Jerry Anderson. This is the same Firefly surgeon that was going to be operating on Ellie to find a cure. And Joel killed him, and pretty well every other Firefly in that hospital. So, yeah, she's understandably a little pissed. Ever since then, Abby has been training her body and has been obsessed with hunting down Joel with the help of her friends at the WLF. So we're back at Seattle day one again, but we're not as Ellie, we're playing as Abby. The players here are Abby's friend Manny, Abby's ex-boyfriend Owen, and Owen's current girlfriend Mel, who kind of has a strained relationship with Abby. She's also pregnant with Owen's baby. Really, the whole point of playing of Abby and making you relive the same 3 days is to give you a different perspective of what happened, to show you some insight into Abby and the WLF, to hopefully make you empathize with her and with all of them, and to show you that actions have direct consequences. Because right now, we've already seen what Ellie has done. Now we need to see what all of those actions have caused little ripple effects throughout Abby's community. And so we see that the WLF do in fact have a community that is not unlike Jackson at all. They have a school where little kids go. They have patrol runs to keep the community safe from outsiders and infected. They even have very sweet dogs that they take out on patrol with them, like Alice, a German Shepherd and a very good girl. And the point is to show you that the WLF, like Jackson, are just trying to survive day to day. Whether you like them or not is completely up to you, but the point is to humanize them and just kind of show the parallels. It's also shown that the WLF have many of their own coming back in body bags by the dozen, and it's shown that they've suffered incredible loss. Abby, much like Ellie, goes out on patrol with her friends, only instead of having to be wary of the WLF, which why would she be, she has to be wary of the Seraphites, because these two factions have been at war for quite some time, and it's kind of implied that it's a territory dispute where a truce has fallen by the wayside. Whereas with Ellie, the Seraphites are kind of just another obstacle, like the infected, in her way as she goes to find Abby and the WLF. Abby's playstyle is quite a bit different from Ellie's in the sense that she's much more muscular, so she kind of plays a little bit like Joel. She hits a lot harder than Ellie does, so she can kind of brute force her way through some of the closer encounters in the game. And in fact, if you level up her character enough, she becomes stronger the more that she hits people. She doesn't have a knife so much like Joel. She'll either have to take people out silently by strangling them. I know this sounds so nice. Or by crafting shivs to take them out. Her weapons also vary a little bit from Ellie's. She has a shotgun with craftable incendiary shells, a hunting pistol with craftable ammo, a regular pistol with a craftable silencer, a rifle with optional burst fire, a flamethrower, and a crossbow instead of a bow and arrow. Abby can also craft pipe bombs, but not Molotovs or trap mines. And it should also be noted that both of the women can use a new dodge mechanic, which is quite useful if you're, say, fighting human enemies or runners who have no weapon on them, or perhaps a melee weapon. These two storylines parallel each other in many ways, including the use of flashbacks. We can see over time how Abby's obsession with Joel has caused her to alienate those around her, including her relationship with Owen, which has dissolved from love to friendship, and with Mel, which is just super fragile and complicated. So while Abby is sort of in this post-revenge state where she's trying to heal her relationships, Ellie is in a current revenge state where she is still pushing people away. Whereas Ellie's 3 days show her losing herself more and more, Abby's 3 days kind of show her coming to a sort of peace within herself. So they differ in those two ways. They definitely are on two different paths. And this really starts when Abby is kidnapped by the Seraphites and kind of strung up for dead, only to be saved by two of the younger, as the Seraphites call them, apostates. They are Lev and Yara, and they're two siblings. They've been cast out by the Seraphites, although at this point in time it's unclear why, but we find out later. The three of them help each other out, even though they're sworn enemies, Seraphites and WLF. Abby at first has no intention of helping Lev and Yara more than what she needs to, but she's kind of racked by guilt, which sets in motion a redemption of sorts. As Abby says, she needs to lighten the load a little. And for me, that means not necessarily that she was doing this for Lev and Yara or for selfless reasons, but more that Abby was still having some feelings about killing Joel and about distancing others around her and getting them involved, and that this would kind of help Abby feel a bit better. So not an entirely selfless reason, but she does end up developing a relationship with Lev and Yara anyway. The majority of Abby's playthrough is actually not dissimilar to Ellie and Joel's relationship in the first game, in the sense that Abby will be playing with Lev and at times Yara, sometimes both. And it's that same feeling of having to build up trust between the two, the way that Joel didn't really trust Ellie, Ellie didn't really trust Joel, and they ended up loving each other by the end. It's the same here. Abby doesn't really trust either Lev or Yara. Yara and Lev don't really trust Abby, but they end up bonding a lot. We learn more about Lev and Yara and why they've been cast out and chased by their own community, which is that Lev was meant to be a child bride to one of the men there, and Lev was struggling with his gender identity and came out as transgender, only to be met with tons of hate and violence. We see moments of Abby becoming more and more motherly towards the two siblings. We see the softer side of her, especially in the way that she treats Lev. In time, we start to see Abby as more and more human, more and more of her own person. We see her becoming more at peace as her nightmares sort of dissolve away and become something softer and more gentle. As she runs through the Firefly Hospital in her dreams, instead of seeing her father dead on the floor, she sees her father greeting her with a peaceful smile. This is almost the reverse of what's happening to Ellie. Unfortunately, we already know that this can't last. Of course, because they are warring factions, when the WLF find out that Abby has been helping the Seraphites, she basically becomes a target on their hit list too. Only Owen, Mel, and Manny are still on Abby's side. Everyone else has an order to bring her into the leader, Isaac. So this leads to a very eventful culmination in the end of day 2 and the start of day 3. An encounter with Abby's friend Manny leads to them being sniped at by none other than Tommy, and Tommy killing Manny, leading Abby to scramble to get away. This leads to Abby fighting through a war zone on Seraphite Island in order to help Lev and Yara being killed by the WLF. Lev and Abby are both nearly killed in the crossfire between the two factions, and when they finally make it back to the aquarium where they think they will be safe, instead they find Alice, the German Shepherd, dead, Owen dead, and Mel dead. And of course, Abby already has an idea of who is to blame. And so this is how we end up back at the denouement, with Abby pointing her guns at Ellie and Tommy. And this one line really makes things so upsetting as she tells Ellie, "We let you live, and you wasted it." Which is true. She did let Ellie and Tommy live, and you can see so many different occasions where if people had just let things go, if this person hadn't done this, if this person hadn't gone after this person, so many things wouldn't have happened. So much violence could have been escaped. But unfortunately, that's not what happens. Abby and Ellie end up fighting backstage at the theater, and this is very reminiscent of the fight between Ellie and David in part 1. Unlike Ellie beating up on David, which felt good because David was absolute evil, this feels bad because you're beating up on Ellie and you don't want to do that. At least I'm assuming most people don't want to do that because we've grown very fond of Ellie. At the same time, some of us have also grown fond of Abby, and we don't want Ellie to kill her either. Dina will come in and try and help, and Abby will hold her at knife point as well. And contrary to a lot of people's reading on this scene, I don't think that Abby wanted to kill Dina. I do see her hesitate, but she will kill Dina if she has to, because of how many people that Ellie has killed in her life, because of how much loss she has experienced. But Lev stops her as she walks away again. Dina, Ellie, and Tommy have all been gravely injured, but they're alive. If Ellie's Act 1 is about how rage consumes, and Abby's Act 2 is about trying to find peace, then Act 3 is about the cycle of violence, how hard it is to break and how hard it is to try and find forgiveness. Things flash forward about a year or so after the events in Seattle. Ellie, Dina, and their baby JJ are living the domestic life on an isolated farmhouse. But the quiet life is hard for Ellie. As we can see, just the simple act of herding sheep can suddenly turn into a horrific memory that instills PTSD into her. Just the slamming of a barn door can suddenly put her back into the basement of the resort house where Joel was killed, and she can hear him screaming out for her, crying for help. Even though this didn't actually happen when he was killed, he never actually called out for her. She hears him do that because she feels a sense of blame for his death. She let Joel down. And instead of trying to work through this grief and trauma in time, goddamn Tommy shows up. He's lost an eye, and he has a severe limp ever since Abby shot him at the theater. But he's still obsessed with her. He has people tracking down her movements, and he knows where she is. But he can't go in his state, so he asks Ellie to do it for him, which is a terrible thing to do. It's a terrible thing to ask Ellie to do. And at first she says no, but we know that she is going to say yes. She gets up during the night, and she plans on leaving without even saying goodbye to Dina. But Dina hears her and she tells Ellie, I'm not going to be here when you get back. Because she knows that this has consumed Ellie so much and that this means more to Ellie than their family does. And so Ellie continues to throw her life away for violence. This last section of the game really shows just how singularly focused Ellie is on Abby. We can even see her fall into a deathly trap at one point. She is stabbed in the side and bleeding out. And all she really can say is Abby's name over and over. That's all she wants. Her name is stuck in Ellie's mouth, like it's all she knows now. When Ellie finds Abby and Lev, they've been held captive at a forced labor camp. They've been strung up without food or water for I don't even know how long by that point, at a place called the Pillars. Abby looks like a shadow of her former self. Her head is shaven. She looks emaciated. She calls out for help and sees Ellie instead. This is not who Abby expected to see, and this is not the Abby Ellie expected to see. When Ellie cuts Abby down, it's clear that Abby's only concern is Lev. She picks him up and starts leading him away to some boats to escape, and even tells Ellie, you're free to come with us, which she does. And for a minute, you think everything's fine. Everybody's just going to walk away. After all, they're both battered and broken. And this clearly isn't the Abby that Ellie was trying to seek revenge on, so what's the point? But Ellie sees another flash to Joel's dead body, and she can't let go. You take control of Ellie, and you start to fight. And it's probably the hardest fight of the game because they are both just pathetic at this point. They're both just trying to survive and cling to life. And I didn't want them to continue. I just wanted them to stop and walk away. They're both such broken people. And like Abby even chews off two of Ellie's fingers just trying to live. That's how badly she just wants to live and walk away to get Lev to safety for another day. Ellie gets the upper hand as she starts choking Abby out. She starts drowning her in the water and she starts crying. She's at her limit. And she sees a flash of Joel, a happy memory, on the porch playing guitar. And she stops. Because she realizes something. This isn't the revenge I wanted. I've lost everything and I'm losing myself. This won't fix anything. Joel wouldn't want this. I need to forgive Joel, and I need to forgive myself. Abby leaves with Lev, and we see Ellie alone, a broken person. But we follow her back to the farmhouse one last time. Dina and JJ are gone. All of Ellie's things are packed away in a solitary room, along with her guitar, which she can no longer play properly because two of her fingers are gone. And we see one final flashback with her and Joel to the night before he was killed. Ellie scolds him, telling him why she has been so angry at him these last few years, and that while she can't forgive him, she would like to try. So Joel died without Ellie ever actually getting to forgive him, ever actually giving him forgiveness. That's why she let Abby go. That forgiveness is what really haunts her. The fact that she never got the chance to forgive Joel. She hears Joel cry out for her every time she has PTSD flashbacks, and she never ever makes it to him in time. She blames herself, and she needs to forgive herself. People who read this as a very simple revenge story are probably going to be disappointed because there is no revenge. Vengeance is not exacted. I think that's what a lot of people read this game as, though. It's some sort of John Wick video game, and it's not. This game, much like the first, is here to present the idea that morality is ultimately very complex. It's not black and white, it's shades of gray. It's just not that simple. It's not good versus evil. And so this game doesn't take the easy way out in presenting its narrative, which sure, very easily could have been point A to point B revenge story, which had you kill the bad guys. Instead, by forcing you to play through two separate perspectives, the game asks you a question. Who is the villain? And who gets to decide that? By all intents and purposes, Joel was a villain. And not just Abby's life, but the lives of so many people that he crossed, including all of the Fireflies and all of the WLF. But he was also a good man. Do his good actions cancel out the bad ones? No. It just shows that in some eyes, he was good, and in some, he was bad. Abby is the villain to Ellie. But Abby is also a strong and vital part of her community. She was a beloved daughter, she was a good friend, she was a good girlfriend, and she was like a mother to Yara and Lev. Again, does this cancel out all of the bad that she did? No, but nothing is black and white. And now Ellie has lived long enough to see herself become the villain in someone else's story. She is a villain to Abby and also to Lev. She killed countless numbers of the WLF, including close friends of Abby's, such as Alice, Owen, and Mel, and their baby. She threatened to kill Lev, but Ellie, of course, is a good person in her own right. Interestingly, Ellie never actually finds out the reason why Abby killed Joel. She just assumes it was because there was a dispute over the fact that Ellie was immune and the Fireflies never got a chance to harvest their vaccine. She doesn't know that Joel is the one who killed Abby's father. This is another way that Ellie subsequently blames herself for Joel's death. She thinks it could have been avoided if not for her. A sad feeling I have is that if they'd met under different circumstances, Abby and Ellie probably would have been really good friends. They are so incredibly similar. The point being, if we are only presented one side of a story, Ellie would be the hero and Abby would be the villain. But we can see it's not that simple. Each of them is both a hero and a villain at the same time, not one or the other. And I think a lot of people are struggling with this idea because this is so often how narratives are presented. One person is good, one person is bad, and that's all they are. Too often we're presented where it has to be either or. But here, it doesn't have to be that way. The sooner we can get over that, the sooner we can be more open to accepting each character and their story as a whole instead of just their parts. The story also touches on how far we're willing to go for love and how our obsession with hate can consume us to the point where we lose our humanity. It's about what Joel was willing to do because he loved Ellie. It was about what Abby was willing to do because she loved her dad. It's about what Ellie was willing to do because she loved Joel, and ultimately what they were both willing to let go of because of love, because Abby loves Lev, and because Ellie loves Dina and JJ. I'd like to think that when we see Ellie walking away in the final scene, it's to go and find them again. But that's just me being hopeful. Neil Druckmann also made a point that if the player doesn't at least understand Abby by the end of the game, then the game just won't work for you. And I agree with that. I don't think you have to like her by the end of the game, but if you don't at least empathize with her, then this game just falls apart. This game did click for me, though. I absolutely felt emotionally exhausted while playing this game. It's not a fun game to play by any means, just because all of the characters are in so much pain. There's so much violence, and it's an emotional journey. There were so many times where I didn't want Ellie to hurt Abby. I didn't want Abby to hurt Ellie, and I just wanted it all to end. Watching the two perspectives and seeing how the actions affected one person or the other, I just genuinely felt bad. So hearing that people played through this game only to go back to part one and flamethrower the surgeon in the hospital, I feel like you missed the points made about the cycle of violence and empathy. These are the same people, no doubt, sending death threats to the people who made the game or involved with the game. And I don't expect everyone to like this game, but you also shouldn't be sending sexism, transphobia, homophobia, racism, anti-Semitism, and death threats to the people involved just because the story wasn't what you expected. That reflects on you, not on the people who made the game. So those are all of my thoughts on part two. I think that it is narratively very complex, and probably why it has become one of the most talked about games I can think about in recent years. And so was part one, but it definitely had more people talking positively about it, and this is completely split down the middle. But that tells me that this game made a lot of interesting choices. And I hope that the amount of hate that this game has received towards the actors involved, towards the director, the writer, the people who made the game, towards people who like the game even, will not prevent people from making interesting creative choices in the future. Because I like interesting games and I want people to keep trying new things. So let me know if you played The Last of Us Part 2, what you thought of it, and if you enjoyed it. If you didn't like it, tell me why. I'd like to know. So if you'd like to see more gaming videos, check the links down below. I will have that for you there. If you'd like to subscribe, there's a button where you can do so. And if you don't want to, that's okay. I hope you're all staying very safe and very well. And I hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.